We're gathered here today to give the kavod achrein to HaRav Nachman Rabbi Zalman, who is and was the quintessential Talmud of our yeshiva. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Omer of Shmuel bar Shilas, Ochim li behespeda dehosim ka'imna. Rav said to Rav Shmuel bar Shilas that warm up the people at my hesped, dehosim ka'imna, I am there. The Gemara uses this mimer as a question on another mimer of Rav. Rav said, Mehespeda shel Adam, a person from his hesped is niker imhu ben olam haba. And the Gemara understood that the stature of Rav was such that it would be clear, what do you need this ochim li behespeda, the hasim ka'imno, why do we have to warm the people up at the hesped? Isn't his stature itself enough? I believe we see from the question that the Gemara asks is that perhaps the hasam ka'imna doesn't refer just to the presence of the nifter at his hesped, but the hasam ka'imna is talking about the place there in the olam ha'emes, when he comes before the kisei hakavod. One of the extraordinary things of the Dinei Shamayim are ma oimrim alav. What do people hold of him? The Gemara says, Agra de hespeda diluye, that really the schar of a hesped is the crying, the feeling, to suffer the loss of an exceptional person. It's Chanukah, and perhaps Diluya is not the proper venue for that. However, this idea of the hasam ka'imna as a reference to the olam ha'emes, perhaps we should focus on the milas of the nifter in order to elevate the magnificent place that he will come to in the olam ha'emes. Because if we focus on his milas and perhaps can take from his life lessons that we can incorporate in our own lives, then his life is a limud for us, and perhaps a challenge for all who knew him, that if we incorporate his Meiridik Milas in our lives, that will be a source of his continued aliyah in the Olam HaEmes. And the emes is, as Rav Nachman is mechayev kolanu, he's mechayev all of us. Number one, he was a bar sid she'eino ma'abed tipa. Not only did he absorb all the Torah that he was mekabel from Moran Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal, he also retained all the history, maisim, and hanahagas that Moran used to share with us about his rebbeim and gedolim that he knew personally, as well as the Messiah of how to view all the richness and values of our enormous heritage. This was an integral part of Rav Nachman's life. He lived with all of that. He was indeed the quintessential Talmud of Moran Rosh Yeshiva, in that Torah was central to his life, irrespective of what one does for Parnasa. His example is not only Mechayev Balabatim, it's Mechayev all of us. His Asmada and his incredible Avas HaTorah that he absorbed from his Rebbeim motivated an insatiable desire to have Yedias and Kol HaTorah Kula. We all knew that if you brought your car to the shop for repair, it would require a discussion on whatever sugya you were learning, and he would be there as if that was the sugya that he was involved in. His stature as a Talmid Chacham was well recognized not only in the yeshiva, but throughout our community and beyond. For years, he came to the yeshiva for Yomim Neroyim and spoke to the Bachrim at one of the Sudas. For decades, he spoke Shalashudas time at a minyan in Rabbi Alvin Gerstein's home, with whom he shared the chavrusa for more than a yovel of shonim. Rav Nosson Nussbaum Shlita related to me that he visited of Beryl Soloveitchik, the Briskerov's son, about a year after Rav Nachman was privileged to visit with him. And Reb Beryl asked him, "Was macht the balabas? How is the balabas in Baltimore who knows my father, the Briskerov's Torah, so well?" After his working life was over, began a new chelik of his life. He created a kollel for retired balabatim, for people who have time on their hands, to learn, but not stam, superficial learning, but to learn be'iyun, to sit down and become yeshiva bachurim again, to have the people to share the excitement that he had every time he said over a shtickle Torah, even when he said over a maisa. It was b'chol koichai, it was with such tremendous gishmak. The gishmak that he had as a teenager learning in the yeshiva never left him. The gishmak in learning was so incredibly contagious. And that's something that all of us need, that all of us can learn and incorporate into our lives. He was a marbitz Torah. The shmuzin that he said for those many years in Baltimore, people came specifically to hear, to learn from him, to be able to absorb the enormous breadth of knowledge that he had in all kinds of sugyas and in all inyonim. And especially when he gave over all that he was makabel from the Rosh Yeshiva about the Deiras HaKaidmim, about the Hanhogas of Gedolei Yisrael. Yet with all his hasmada and the centrality of Torah in his life, he was Moser B'Leiv V'Nefesh to his Eishes Chayil. They were Zeicha to two very choshev sons and to wonderful grandchildren. Over the last number of years, I know that he was working very hard because he called me often to check on veracity of different stories. He was putting together a chibur of all the maisim that he was mekabel from the Rosh Yeshiva, Zichronu Livrocha. And hopefully someday that will yet be published, because the reichkeit of the Messiah that motivated and that was just bubbled out of him throughout his life is something that could be an everlasting memorial to him, and in his being the Baal Messiah of that wonderful reichkeit.